History lesson tonight. But it's remarkable not because it's a history lesson. It's remarkable because it's a history lesson that was taught hundreds of years before it was history, because of the prophecy that's involved. In the 10th chapter of the book of Daniel, we saw the beginning of the final vision recorded by Daniel. A vision which explains, pertains to what things that will affect Daniel's people, Israel, describing what will occur in the future, or some versions have latter days, but a time yet to come. And its words were to be closed and sealed till the time of the end. Daniel 12 verse 9 will tell us once we get to Daniel chapter 12 verse 9. But for such reasons, this vision has been called the vision of the time of the end. And chapter 10 contains the introduction, we might say. And so in those introductory remarks, we're given a glimpse of the spiritual warfare that is going on and that's in play even today. But that is behind the scenes, with angelic forces battling against each other, with other angelic forces coming to the aid of angelic forces that need help, with Michael introduced as one of your chief princes, Daniel 10 verse 13, and as your prince, Daniel 10 verse 21. But beginning in chapter 11 verse 2, the vision of the time of the end begins to get intense. It begins to get really interesting, as the case, as the word might be. The glorious man proceeds to tell Daniel what will happen in the future. And he begins by explaining what we see and know as the Persian-Greek conflict in verses 2 through 4. It says, "Now then, I tell you the truth. 3 more kings will appear in Persia, then a 4th, who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will appear who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. After he has appeared, his empire will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because his empire will be uprooted and given to others." So in these couple of verses, 3 verses, a couple of things we notice. First of all, 4 Persian kings will arise. This is speaking after Cyrus. Okay, after the time of Cyrus, once Cyrus the Persian retires or dies, there'll be 4 more Persian kings, 3 more kings, and then a 4th. The 4th, though, will be far richer than all of the others. And by his strength and riches, the 4th will stir everyone up against Greece. Now, as confirmed by history, these kings who followed Cyrus were Cambius, Smerdis, Darius Hystaspes, or Darius the Great. We'll call him Darius the Great, okay? And Xerxes. Yes, that Xerxes from the story of Esther. That Xerxes, he was the richest Persian king. And he is that 4th king that, as prophesied here in Daniel, would be richer than all the others. As he is going about, he will stir up people against the kingdom of Greece. But in the kingdom of Greece, a mighty king will rise and fall. This king will appear, verse 3 tells us, he will rule with great power. He will do as he pleases. Any guesses as to who this particular king of Greece would be? Alexander the Great. Okay, so probably the only Greek king that we know the name of, right? Or that we can think of off the top of our head. But this was Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great ruled, but his kingdom was broken and divided into 4 pieces. This also was prophesied in Daniel 8, verses 21 and 22. The kingdom will not be given to his descendants, but it also would not have the same power. Now then, this also is confirmed by history that Alexander's empire was not passed on to a son or a grandson or some heir of his. That instead 4 of his generals divided things up after he died in 323 BC at the tender young age of 33. Those 4 generals were Seleucus I, who began the Seleucid dynasty in Syria, or the Syrian Empire from Turkey to India. Cassander, who took over Macedonia or Greece. And Lysimachus, who took Thrace between Greece and Turkey. And Ptolemy I, who ruled over Egypt. So one kingdom, the kingdom of Alexander the Great, actually becomes 4 kingdoms. And the factions, the four kingdoms, they don't always get along, and we'll talk about that in just a few moments. Excuse me. But at this point, the glorious man begins to describe that extended conflict between the kings of the north and the kings of the south, which will have a big impact on the people of Daniel, that is Israel. So that's the Persian and the Greek conflict in a nutshell. From there, there's the next conflict is the Egyptian-Syrian conflict, verses 5 through 19. The king of the south will become strong, but one of his commanders will become even stronger than he and will rule his own kingdom with great power. After some years, they will become allies. The daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance, but she will not retain her power, and he and his power will not last. In those days, she will be handed over together with her royal escort and her father and the one who supported her. One from her family line will arise to take her place. He will attack the forces of the king of the north and enter his fortress. He will fight against them and be victorious. He will also seize their gods, their metal images, their valuable articles of silver and gold, and carry them off to Egypt. For some years, he will leave the king of the north alone. Then the king of the north will invade the realm of the king of the south, but will retreat to his own country. His sons will prepare for war and assemble a great army, which will sweep on like an irresistible flood, and carry the battle as far as his fortresses. Then the king of the south will march out in a rage and fight against the king of the north, who will raise a large army, but it will be defeated. When the army is carried off, the king of the south will be filled with pride and will slaughter many thousands, yet he will not remain triumphant. For the king of the north will muster another army, larger than the first, and after several years he will advance with a huge army fully equipped. In those times many will rise against the king of the south. The violent men among their own people will rebel in fulfillment of the vision, but without success. Then the king of the north will come and build up siege ramps and will capture a fortified city. The forces of the south will be powerless to resist. Even their best troops will not have the strength to stand. The invader will do as he pleases. No one will be able to stand against him. He will establish himself in the beautiful land and will have the power to destroy it. He will determine to come with the might of his entire kingdom and will make an alliance with the king of the south. And he will give him a daughter in marriage in order to overthrow the kingdom, but his plans will not succeed or help him. Then he will turn his attention to the coastland and will take many of them. But a commander will put an end to his insolence and will turn his insolence back upon him. After this, he will turn back toward the fortresses of his own country, but will stumble and fall to be seen no more. Okay, that's a lot to take in, but hopefully we'll be able to make it a little bit easier to digest in just a moment. So the conflict will begin. And the way it begins is the king of the south will become strong. Okay, if you look back at the earlier part of Daniel 11, and all of Daniel even, you'll find that this is the first mention of the king of the south. Now there's a great debate over whether or not the king of the south is one person or many people. Same thing with the king of the north. I believe that it's not talking about the same person all the way through, but various kings throughout a period of time. So that's what we're going to go with. The king of the south will become strong. This king that becomes strong is Ptolemy the First, who ruled Egypt from 306 to 284. He was one of Alexander the Great's generals who took over the southernest part of the kingdom, and that would be Egypt. But one of his commanders will become even stronger, and this becomes the king. This is the king in the north. This commander, another of Alexander's generals or princes, is Seleucus the First, who ruled Syria after the kingdom was divided up. I know that's kind of hard to understand and everything. Perhaps this map will help. This map shows in purple the empire of Alexander the Great. And here's Syria right here, and here's Egypt right here. Now, caught right in the middle of Egypt and Syria is another little place called Palestine. Palestine is where the Israelites dwelt. They're caught in the middle. As they were caught in the middle, they would bear much of the brunt of much of the conflict between Syria and Egypt. Because Syria moves south to go to Egypt. Egypt moves north to counteract Syria's movements. And where do you think they meet? They meet right there in the middle in Palestine. So Palestine was going to face a lot of problems because of this. Now then, there will be a failed alliance as well. The daughter of the south will go to the king of the north. These events occurred during the reigns of Ptolemy II, the king of the south, and Antiochus II, the king of the north. What happened was Bernice, daughter of Ptolemy II, was given in marriage to Antiochus upon the condition that Antiochus divorce his wife Laodice. And they were hoping that this would make peace between Egypt and Syria. But the daughter of the king of the south will lose her power, will not retain her power, verse 6 tells us. 2 years after the marriage, Bernice's father, Ptolemy II, died. So what is Antiochus to do? Well, Antiochus put Bernice away, divorced her, and took Laodice back as his wife. So you would think that everything would be all hunky-dory and that'd be great. Laodice would be happy. And, Bernice never had much power anyhow. She was just a pawn, and so it didn't matter. Well, Laodice poisoned Antiochus because Antiochus had put her away earlier to marry Bernice. She didn't like that very much, apparently. So she poisoned Antiochus. Then Bernice fled, but was later put to death along with her infant child and her attendants by Seleucus II, Laodice's son. Okay, so far pretty exciting stuff's going on, right? Well, then the king of the south will rise in anger. One from her family line, the family line of Bernice, and thus of Ptolemy II, would come with an army. This would be Bernice's brother, who was named Ptolemy III. Okay, they all had different names as well, but you can't pronounce a lot of them, and it's easier to just say 1, 2, 3, or first, second, third. So this is Ptolemy the Third, who reigned from 246 to 221 BC, who, failing to save his sister, because remember she was put to death, he couldn't save her, attacked Syria to avenge her death. Well, the avenger, Ptolemy III, will succeed, Daniel 11 verse 8 tells us. And he took their gods, he took their princes, their precious articles to Egypt, where he stayed the remainder of his reign. He ruled longer than the next Seleucid king, Seleucus II, who only reigned 246 to, excuse me, until from 221 to 226. Okay, so we've had some pretty bad conflicts here, alliances that haven't worked. Well, guess what? Next step in the prophecy is the conflict will accelerate. It'll escalate. It'll get even more intense. The king of the north, Seleucus II, will try to invade the king of the south. And he does not succeed. They are turned back. And again, remember, Palestine is right in the way of all of this going on and everything. Though his sons, Seleucus III and Antiochus III, who was also known as Antiochus the Great, will prepare for battle, will prepare for war. One son in particular, Antiochus the Great, does succeed in actually overwhelming Egypt, regaining Syrian land that was taken by Egypt. So, king of the north tries to invade the king of the south, and it doesn't meet with success, but his sons do. The king of the south will respond in a rage. Do you sense a pattern going on here? The north attacks the south attacks the north attacks the south attacks the north. This king of Egypt is Ptolemy IV. Angry that Antiochus the Great regained control of Syrian territory, he gathered a great army together and defeated Antiochus at Rapha. His victory, though, was very short-lived, for Antiochus returned with a better equipped army in 203 BC, and he was able to defeat him. Others, though, are going to contribute to the war against the south. Okay, because more people didn't like Egypt and didn't like Syria, apparently. This included Philip, king of Macedon, who aligned with Antiochus. Also some violent Jews who were prompted by what they perceived as fulfillment of the vision here, but they failed. Pardon me, but you can see why these Jews would be angry. I mean, they're right in the middle of all of these things. They're caught in the crosshairs. The king of the north, though, will prevail over the king of the south, but then fall. Again, this is Antiochus the Great. The forces of the south were not able to resist him. He stood in the glorious land, making reference to Israel, with the destruction in his power. He tried to strengthen his kingdom by giving his daughter in marriage. His daughter was a young lady named Cleopatra. And she was given by her father, Antiochus the Great, to the 7-year-old Ptolemy V. Okay? He was 7 years old when they got married. The marriage was not consummated until 5 years later. I guess that's when she was over her cooties or something. I don't know. But 7-year-old kid getting married for political purposes. Kind of weird. But anyway, 5 years later it was consummated. But the problem is that Cleopatra, rather than doing what her husband hoped, or her father hoped she would do, she sided with her husband. So Antiochus then turned his attention to the coastlands because his plans to take Egypt didn't work out. So he looked toward the coastlands of the Mediterranean. There was another emerging power that had control of that. That was the Romans. They had some power and were beginning to build an empire. And they did a pretty good job of putting this guy in his place, and Antiochus in his place. Defeated by the Romans, Antiochus the Great returned home, and he died shortly thereafter. At this point, we want to turn most of our attention to one leader of the Seleucid Empire, or the Syrian Empire, the king of the north, that would have a great impact, a powerful impact upon the people of Daniel. His name was Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Now remember chapter 8, the ram and the goat, and how the goat had a little horn that grew and became exceedingly great. Daniel 8, verse 9 and 23 through 26. Well, that was Antiochus Epiphanes. Let's read verses 20 through 35 in Daniel 11. His successor will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendor. In a few years, however, he will be destroyed, yet not in anger or in battle. He will be succeeded by a contemptible person who has not been given the honor of royalty. He will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. Then an overwhelming army will be swept away by him. Both it and a prince of the covenant will be destroyed. After coming to an agreement with him, he will act deceitfully, and with only a few people he will rise to power. When the richest provinces feel secure, he will invade them and will achieve what neither his fathers nor his forefathers did. He will distribute plunder, loot, and wealth among his followers. He will plot the overthrow of fortresses, but only for a time. With a large army, he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south. The king of the south will wage war with a large army, large and very powerful army, but he will not be able to stand because of the plots devised against him. Those who eat from the king's provisions will try to destroy him. His army will be swept away, and many will fall in battle. The two kings, with their hearts bent on evil, will sit at the same table and lie to each other, but to no avail, because an end will still come at the appointed time. The king of the north will return to his own country with great wealth, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant. He will take action against it and will then return to his own country. At the appointed time, he will invade the south again, but this time the outcome will be different from what it was before. Ships of the western coastlands will oppose him, and he will lose heart. Then he will turn back to vent his fury against the holy covenant. He will return and show favor to those who forsook the holy covenant. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortresses and will abolish the daily sacrifices. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. With flattery, he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant. But the people who know their God will firmly resist him. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword or be burned or captured or plundered. When they fall, they will receive little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. Some of the wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will come at the appointed time. Okay, again, a lot of information. If we break it down into smaller bites, hopefully it'll help us understand it a little bit better. Antiochus Epiphanes would be preceded by a tax collector, one who would impose taxes on the glorious kingdom, speaking about Israel in all likelihood. This would be Seleucus IV. Stop. This would be Seleucus IV, or Seleucus Philopator. I told you they're sort of hard to say. Who was the oldest son of Antiochus the Great, and was his immediate successor to Antiochus the Great, was Seleucus IV. His reign, though, would be short-lived, compared to the reign of his father. His reign was very short. His father reigned 37 years. And then Seleucus IV died, but not in battle. He was poisoned. Okay? That's what you did when you didn't like the ruler. You poisoned them. And so anyway, he would be succeeded, Seleucus would be succeeded by a contemptible person. Now we're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. He was held in contempt. The people would give him no honor. See, his official name was Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus the Illustrious. But his people referred to him as Antiochus Epimanes, which means Antiochus the Insane. I'm sure they didn't do that to his face, because if he was known as Antiochus the Insane and you insult him to his face, he would likely go insane on you. And so it wasn't to his face, but that's what they called him. That was his nickname. He would take the kingdom peaceably, but through deceit. Maybe this was because he wasn't actually in line for succession, but was the brother of Seleucus IV. Not an heir of Seleucus IV, and yet he assumes power after Seleucus IV is poisoned. This may be referring also to his dealings with the Egyptians, or perhaps Israel, because after making an alliance with them, he will act deceitfully and become strong with a small number of people. Through peaceful means, he would plunder the richest places in the province, and he would provoke the king of the south. So we're poking with the stick a little bit, we might say. And 2 times Antiochus invaded Egypt. The Egyptian king, which was Ptolemy VI, sought to oppose him, but was betrayed by his own people. Now, both of these kings, Antiochus and Ptolemy, they would sit down together, and they were deceitful liars. Imagine that, political leaders who were deceitful liars. And they would sit down together and they would lie to each other's face and everything. But their plotting was subject to the times and manners appointed by God. On his return home, Antiochus passed through Israel. He was mad. What's a king with a large army to do when they're mad? But sort of plunder, take over things. He set his heart against the Holy Covenant, the institutions of the law of Moses and of Israel. And he will bring blasphemies against Israel. Once again, Antiochus Epiphanes heads towards the south. This is his third invasion of Egypt, but he was not as successful as before. He wasn't successful because Rome hears about this and they decide they want to intervene. They want in on the action. And so Roman ships from Cyprus threatened reprisal. Frustrated because he can't get to Egypt because of the Romans, he's going to take out his fury against the Holy Covenant. Again, he's going to attack Israel, showing favor to those who forsook the Holy Covenant. If you were a traitor in Israel and you sided with Antiochus Epiphanes, he would be grateful to you and he would reward you. But he didn't just do that. He desecrated the temple. He abolished the daily sacrifices. He flattering those who violated the covenant. In the years 169 to 167 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes took the city of Jerusalem and he plundered the temple. He commanded the Jews to worship the Greek idol Jupiter, which he set up in the actual temple. He put an end to the daily sacrifices, and he polluted the altar by offering swine flesh on it. He set up the abomination that causes desolation, chapter 9:27. He forbid circumcision. He forbid the observance of the Sabbath. He forbid people to even possess a copy of the law. And those who knew God, who wanted to remain faithful and true to God, they resisted valiantly. They had a valiant resistance. They would resist him firmly, carrying out great exploits, instructing many, but they would fail because they would receive little help in their struggle against them. And for many days, they would fall by the sword. They would be burned, captured, plundered. They would receive little help even from many who were not sincere. With those understanding, when those of understanding fall, it would refine them, though. It would, kind of like how sometimes failure can bring the people who felt closer together. Well, that's kind of what happened here. To purify them and make them spotless until the time of the end, for it will come at the appointed time. Now, the events described here were fulfilled during the Maccabean period, which began in 168 BC with the revolt of Matthias, an elderly priest, and his 5 sons. And they were able to purify the temple and so forth. Up to this point, there is very little controversy over the context of the vision. It describes the conflict between the Persians and the Greeks, followed later by the conflict between the Syrians and the Egyptians. The latter described in detail because Israel was caught right in the middle. Israel in particular would suffer the blasphemies of one Syrian king, Antiochus Epiphanes. From Daniel 11:36 on, though, there's quite a diversity of opinions. Some believe Antiochus Epiphanes is still the subject. Others suggest that a Roman emperor is being described. Still others believe it refers to someone who is yet to come. We're going to examine the remaining portion of this chapter, chapter 11, verse 36 and following, and chapter 12 in our next study. Unfortunately, our next study will not happen for 3 weeks because next Sunday night, Gene Clore is going to be here to speak to us. Then the following Sunday night is an Agape Sunday. And then the week after that, we have a gentleman from Hope Harbor that's going to come and tell us about the mission and ministry that Hope Harbor is doing. So it won't be until December 13th that we can get back to Daniel. So I want you to all remember all that we've talked about so far, because the next lesson is part 3 of a 3-part lesson on the vision of the time of the end. We'll probably try and refresh your memory or something at the start of that. But anyway, the point is that these things have to do with the end of God's special relationship to the Jews. And God's special relationship with the Jews ended because God had another special people in mind. Christians, followers of Christ. If you're not a follower of Christ, you need to become a follower of Christ. The way that this is done is by being immersed in the watery grave of baptism, having your sins washed away, and then living a faithful life of service thereafter. If you haven't done that first thing, if you haven't been baptized, now's a great time to do that. Second, if you haven't been faithful in your serving of God, now's a great time to turn your life around and start faithfully serving Him. If we can help you to do that through a public response this evening, why don't you come to the front now as we stand and sing together.